The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, illuminated only by the pale glow of the moon. Ray's car cut through the stillness, headlights tracing a solitary path along the empty highway. He hadn't planned to drive this far tonight, but circumstances had pushed him deeper into the wilderness, away from any sign of civilization. The clock on his dashboard read 1:15 a.m., and the gas gauge was hovering dangerously close to empty. He hadn't seen another car, or even a flicker of light for miles. His stomach growled, hunger gnawing at him, and the prospect of finding food or fuel in this barren wasteland seemed increasingly remote. Just when he was about to give up hope, a faint glow appeared on the horizon, a neon sign blinking weakly in the distance. As he drew closer, Ray saw it was a diner, sitting beside a lonely gas pump. The neon letters flickered, spelling out Jack's Diner, casting a dull pink hue against the surrounding desert. With a sigh of relief, Ray pulled into the gravel parking lot, his tires crunching as he came to a stop. The place looked old, like it hadn't been updated in decades, but at this point, any sign of life was welcome. A gas pump stood beside the diner, an ancient relic from a bygone era, and Ray figured he could fill up after grabbing something to eat. He stepped out of the car, the cool desert air hitting his skin, and made his way to the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly as he pushed it open, and immediately, he was struck by the odd stillness inside. The diner was dimly lit, with just a few flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. A handful of patrons sat scattered around the room, each one hunched over their meals in silence. They didn't look up as Ray entered, their eyes downcast, their movements slow and deliberate. Ray approached the counter and took a seat on one of the cracked vinyl stools. Behind the counter stood a man, heavy-set, broad-shouldered, with a stained apron tied around his waist. His face was rough, his eyes sharp and dark beneath a greasy cap. "Coffee?" the cook asked, his voice gravelly, almost mechanical. "Yeah," Ray nodded. "And a cheeseburger if you've got it." The cook grunted and turned to the grill, his movements slow but practiced. Ray glanced around the room, taking in the other patrons. There was a businessman in a crisp suit, sitting near the window, completely out of place in this dusty, forgotten diner. An older woman, her head wrapped in a floral scarf, sat at a booth, her eyes fixed on the tabletop in front of her. A young couple sat in the far corner, not speaking to each other, their expressions distant. None of them looked at Ray. None of them moved except to sip their drinks or push food around their plates. An uneasy feeling settled in Ray's chest, but he shook it off. It was late, and everyone was probably just tired. He was too. The cook returned with his coffee, placing the chipped mug in front of Ray. "Where you headed?" the man asked, his tone flat. "Just passing through," Ray said, not really in the mood for small talk. "Got a long drive ahead." The cook nodded slowly, a strange smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Long road at night. You ever hear music while you drive? Out there, in the middle of nowhere." Ray frowned. "Not really." The cook's smile grew, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Music's everywhere if you know how to listen. You should play something." He gestured toward the jukebox in the corner of the diner, a relic from a bygone era, its neon lights flickering faintly. "Go ahead, pick a song. It's on the house." Ray glanced at the jukebox, its presence looming strangely in the dim light. He wasn't in the mood for music, not after hours of driving. "Nah, I'm good," he said, trying to sound polite. The cook's smile faltered, a flicker of something darker passing across his face. "Small. Just one song. Help pass the time." Ray shook his head. "Maybe later. Just want to eat." The air in the diner grew thick, the silence oppressive. The other patrons, who had been so still before, shifted uneasily in their seats. Their eyes darted toward Ray, then quickly away, as if they were trying to warn him without speaking. The woman in the scarf caught Ray's eye for just a moment, her lips moving imperceptibly, forming silent words. "Don't!" Ray's skin prickled with unease. Something was wrong here, very wrong. The bell above the door jingled softly, but no one had entered or left. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen, as if the walls were closing in. Then his phone vibrated in his pocket. Ray pulled it out, thankful for the distraction. There was a new message from an unknown number. Don't play the jukebox. Whatever you do, don't play a song. He's not what he seems. Leave. Now. Ray stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He glanced around the room, but no one had moved. The woman with the scarf stared straight ahead, her hands trembling slightly. Play a song, the cook repeated, his voice lower now, more insistent. Ray tensed, gripping his phone tightly. He didn't know what was happening, but every instinct screamed at him to get out of there. He shoved the phone back in his pocket and met the cook's gaze. No! The room seemed to darken, the light flickering above them. The other patrons froze, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. The woman in the scarf mouthed the words again, leave. The cook's smile twisted into a snarl, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. You're gonna play a song, he hissed, his voice no longer human. Everyone does. Ray stood up, ready to leave, but the door to the diner was gone, replaced by a solid wall of darkness. The air grew heavy, thick with something malevolent. The other patrons, who had been sitting silently moments ago, flickered like ghosts, their forms warping and fading. The cook's figure distorted, his features growing monstrous. His skin darkened, cracked, as if burned by some unseen fire. His eyes blazed with an unnatural red light, and his teeth, sharp and jagged, gleamed in the flickering glow of the jukebox. You're not leaving, the cook growled, his voice deep and echoing. Not until you play. Ray's heart raced as the floor beneath him seemed to shift, the very walls of the diner bending and warping like a nightmare brought to life. The jukebox hummed behind him, its neon lights pulsing, beckoning him. He wasn't going to play. Whatever this thing was, whatever game it wanted him to play, he wasn't giving in. With a surge of adrenaline, Ray grabbed the nearest stool and swung it with all his strength. It collided with the jukebox, shattering the glass, sending sparks flying through the air. The machine sputtered and died, the lights going dark. The cook let out a furious roar, the sound shaking the diner to its core. The ground trembled beneath Ray's feet, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then in an instant, it was over. The cook was gone. The patrons were gone. The diner stood empty, abandoned, as if no one had been there in years. Dust coated the countertops. The booths were torn and decayed, and the neon sign outside flickered weakly before going dark. Ray stood in the eerie silence, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was clear: he needed to get out of there. Without looking back, he pushed open the door, stepping into the cold night air. His car sat where he had left it, untouched. The gas pump, which had seemed ancient and rusted just moments ago, was now pristine, gleaming under the moonlight. His tank was full. Ray climbed into the car, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. He started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and sped down the highway, leaving the diner and whatever dark force had haunted it far behind. As the miles stretched out before him, the glow of Jack's diner faded into the night, disappearing into the desert like a forgotten dream.